Dean from PA Systems. He is also our editor for the SP Line Forces magazine. I believe you already met Mr.
Yeah.
We've known each other from.
We go back to many years when we both were in shop.
Really go well, I think, because there's a huge
किचन गार्डन होता है सीओ ने पूछा किचन गार्डन तो आपका बहुत अच्छा रहा ना बिल्कुल तो फिर क्या उगाते बैंगन उगाते आपको पता है बैंगन तो किचन गार्डन को बहुत अच्छे लगते हैं
PA systems.
Morning, sir. How are you doing?
I'll put my stuff in. Come get a cup of coffee.
Select the legal side, he's going to be done in India for 6 months. The key figures.
Looking forward to working with them.
Sorry, I don't have a business card yet.
He's your man. He's your man. He wants you to come. He wants you to like you.
Thank you.
We'll say BA instead of Boeing if you're not careful. You're going to BA.
And they were really Nice to meet you.
Hi, how did you miss production floor?
Huh? No, we are talking, making those.
MSX.
Chai pini agar hai?
Yeah, I know.
Mr. Ghosh? How are you doing?
Extra copies, the bulk copies goes to the Navy as well. You can check back.
Right. Sure.
Hello, सांप कब आए पता नहीं.
Since the armed forces, the government, and the corporate. The Air Chief Marshal Krishna Swamy is here. Welcome, sir. And so are many other distinguished people. In fact, as we all know, there are critics who have often argued that in a country which requires major resource allocation in fields like social and developmental activities, any expenditure on defense has to be fully justified. One couldn't agree more, and I think that is an area or a subject which requires a debate on a different canvas. But within that, what needs to be certainly done is that we need to utilize the resources allocated to us most judiciously. Or as the Americans would say, get bang for the buck. Now, this is the area which we are going to concentrate on, and towards that end, we are embarking on a series of discussions and deliberations, starting from today. because while as a country we are surging ahead, we are emerging as an economic power, there is a tremendous industrial base and potential. As you all know, we continue to import 70% of our arms from abroad, and even the balance 30%, there are large number of components which are imported. Surely we need to do something about it. And with that in view, we have today's deliberations. Before we proceed any further, I would like Dr. Sanjay Joshi to make the opening remarks. Dr. Sanjay Joshi is the director of Observer Research Foundation, an IS officer of 83 batch from Madhya Pradesh, who has ventured out into the corporate field and the economic strategic areas, who's a visiting associate at the International Institute of Strategic Studies, London, distinguished visitor to program on energy and sustainable development, University of Stanford, UK, and many other global organizations. May I now request Dr. Sanjay Joshi to give his opening remarks.
Thank you, Jayendra Sharma, and a very warm welcome to all the distinguished delegates assembled here for this conference. I must thank the SP Group and especially Mr. Parnwal for the timing of this conference and the background in which this is occurring. So just the other day, I was rereading one of my favorite books, which is Joseph Heller's Something Happened. And it was striking the kind of parallels which one could see. Here is this man, Bob Slocum, who's got everything in life going for him. He's the prime of his life. Very successful, made a lot of money, happily settled family, going great guns, something which India itself was doing between 2000 to 2008-9. And suddenly in the middle of all this, he gets struck by a deep existential crisis and does not know which way he's going to be headed and what is happening in the world around him. This is the kind of situation, this deep existential crisis which we find ourselves in today, is, I think, cause for thought and makes us pause and think in the overall structure, the framework of governance, of the way things are happening, or the way things are done. And what is important about being in the middle of an existential crisis, even for individuals, is that in the middle of a crisis, the rituals, the processes, the procedures become more important than the substance. And the substance is often lost sight of. So ORF for a long time has, on a sustained basis, been involved in debates around various issues related to the macro construct of India's defense and international policies. As an institution, ORF, yes, has been looking at long-term strategies, been looking at imperatives of hard power, it's been looking at the shifting sands of international relations from time to time. But these have all been part of the macro perspective studies. This is the kind of stargazing think tanks like ours do. It seems to be our bread and butter as we try and delineate the kind of overarching superstructure behind our international relations, behind our defense priorities, behind our resource management and resource allocation. However, there is the alternate perspective. And the alternate perspective is, it looks at the macro as the effect. It looks at it as the outcome of positions which are already taken on day-to-day myriad issues which happen in routine course. For example, when we look at the subject of today's debate, it can definitely be argued that who we rely on for our armaments and defense purchases will naturally become strategically important partners. So when a country starts sourcing its fourth and fifth generation defense equipment and hardware from another, then in many ways its foreign policy towards those countries has in a certain sense already been predetermined. So the whole question of defense procurement processes a big debate on what kind of local capacity building can come as a spin-off of these. Ultimately, critical technology transfers are sovereign decisions. Often they are decisions which are not taken by companies, and they become really spin-offs of bilateral and multilateral relationships between countries. So and these are questions which I think will be debated today in the course of this conference, can DPP remain agnostic to the relationship with the nationality of the seller? And should DPP remain aloof from its strategic dimensions and directions? There are questions of price and technical parameters, and how far can those trump larger strategic and security imperatives? So, and these are debates which are taking place around us, all around us in the larger environment today. Eventually, as we try and pull out of this existential crisis we find ourselves in, I go back to my basic point, that eventually we cannot allow processes and protocols alone to decide what are going to be important strategic acquisitions, what are going to determine the future of the Indian industrial military complex, which we hope to see develop in the next 10 to 20 years from now. So for this conference, I'm also very happy that besides practitioners, policymakers, a lot of representatives of think tanks, members of the diplomatic corps, we will also be having some politicians come and present their views during the course of the day. So these multiple myriad decisions which we take day to day, not just on procurement and offsets, but the wider framework of our entire industrial policy. Our policy relating to the questions of manufacturing versus services, our laws on patents, our labor laws, and eventually the goals of our entire exercise of economic restructuring bear upon and definitely influence the who and how of our engagement with the world. And it is here that our own domestic policies impinge upon and determine what will be the shape, what will be the future of the military-industrial complex of tomorrow that we talk of. Now that is a very Cold War phrase which keeps coming, the military-industrial complex. But then we use it because nothing better sums up the very close linkage between the military and a nation's industrial might. The hard fact that industrial development has invariably resulted in military advantage. Eventually, we must understand that any day-to-day normal policy statement, policy notification, which we read in the newspapers, which we read in the press or comes out of the government, is actually, a cold, stark, and deliberately depoliticized description of what is actually a very dynamic political economy of national defense, which invariably involves multiple stakeholders, all of whom have an amazing diversity of interests. So it is an examination of this political economy that many times, starting from the bottom, details the contours of policy making, lays out the contours of policy making far more vividly, far more realistically than the macro perspectives which we in think tanks normally take. So I will not go deliberate much on these issues. I think I'll listen to the deliberations during the course of the day. We will be debating the whole question, yes, offsets become very, very important. The question also arises, how beneficial is the whole idea, the obsession we have with offsets? Again, it's a big question of a debate. Is it a panacea for the modernization and indigenization of defense industry? Or is it that just this obsession with offsets, all it achieves is that it adds a highly avoidable premium on the cost of acquisitions? Then are they alternative modes that could better enhance